Jimmie Johnson should be fucking shot! No, that was Jimmie Johnson did it!
Boy, the only way NASCAR could have gotten off to a worse start this season is if somebody had been seriously hurt or killed in the clash. Thankfully, that did not happen, but everything else did. And it was almost a confirmation of many folks' fears what 2019 could bring to NASCAR, and consider that we haven't even gotten to the new package yet. You had close racing, but racing where passing was at an immense premium. You could not pass. It was a line of cars. The leaders had an incredible advantage, or the leader, I should say, had an incredible advantage in controlling the field and controlling how the race went. You had inconsistent rules calls, and we'll get to that. Don't worry, some people have very strong opinions one way or the other on that one. And you also had the gigantic wreck at the very end of the race at the one point where we had a true contest for first place, ended up with the leader getting turned across in front of the field and ending up with quite literally 80% of the field crumpled up in a giant heap of sheet metal at the bottom of the banking in turn 3. And again, this is doomsday scenario for NASCAR and for NASCAR fans. This is exactly what people have been fearing would happen in 2019. And really, you know, just looking at the last couple of videos I have made, I was thinking about them before I made this video. And, you know, I talked in the Austin Dillon video, I talked very specifically about, has this created a trend when Austin Dillon wrecked Eric Almirola for the win in the Daytona 500? Well, we get to Daytona 1 year later, that's the title of the video, and Jimmie Johnson, albeit significantly less intentionally, wrecks the leader, Paul Menard, coming to what Johnson rightly predicted would be the last lap before a massive downpour came and ended the race, and managed to turn Paul Menard in front of the field and caused an enormous accident. And I mean, imagine if that happens in the 500 and you have 30 cars involved in the wreck rather than 16. And you also look at and think about the 2019 package. One of the problems, and one of the things we're going to talk about a little bit later in this video, specifically why this style of plate racing is so bad, why you see that line of cars coming around. One of the major factors for that is the downforce levels of the cars. They're not moving around. Drivers are able to drive them essentially where they want, and the leader usually goes up to the top. Guess what? NASCAR is getting more downforce for all the rest of the races this year. So you're going to essentially create this situation at all the 1.5 mile tracks, the 2 mile tracks, and of course the plate tracks as well. There's going to be a lot of carnage, and quite frankly, where NASCAR is right now, at this point in a decline. There's no doubt about it. In fact, there was an article that came out today where NASCAR kind of half-heartedly admitted that they've made mistakes, and then they proceeded to double down on the 2019 package. They said something to the effect of, we want to start doing what the hardcore fans want, but we think the 2019 package is going to be great. They're still just as out of touch as they ever have been, even if they're at that first step, I guess, in the 12-step program of at least admitting they have a problem. They've done that, but it's pretty clear that the rust has set in, so to speak. And the things that have been stacking up and things that people like me have seen coming for a while seem to be starting to happen. Now, granted, the Daytona 500 this year could be a great race, but I think a lot of people are having 2013 vibes. If the weather is cool, like it was for the Clash, it's almost certainly going to be that way, because cool weather generally helps with downforce. It helps with engine horsepower, and it helps with downforce, and it helps with grip, keeps the tires cool. So all of those things just kind of create this perfect storm in which, in my opinion, I don't think I've seen a worse NASCAR race in my life. It was that bad. And that's saying something, because a lot of people have kind of talked about the last couple of seasons how they were some of the worst races they've seen out of NASCAR. Could we point to another race that was worse than this? And I get it. It's a non-championship exhibition race. But I think that kind of really seals the deal. The Clash, or the Budweiser Shootout as it used to be known, in the Busch Clash way back in the day, this race always had a reputation for being where the drivers were not content to sit around. They would go balls to the wall, race hard for 50 or 75 or 25 laps, however long the duel was in that particular year. They would race hard the whole time, and of course that would lead to big crashes or big exciting passes. In this race, you didn't see that. Couple that with the fact that there was a threat of rain, and once they got past the halfway point, you would think, okay, it's an official race, rain is on the way, but you didn't see drivers racing. You didn't see them going for crazy moves. You saw them driving like it was lap 50 of the Daytona 500 rather than lap 50 of the Clash. And that goes solely to the package, how the cars race. And you have a situation where not a lot of competition takes place. And it certainly doesn't help, even though the Clash has always had it, that there was a mandatory caution. The mandatory cautions, the stages, those are going to create situations in the Daytona 500 where you see a lot of riding around. In fact, the Daytona 500 is going to be a race where there's a lot of riding around. I think it's pretty clear from last year and now this year. It's the same package from 2018, and then they'll go into the 2019 package, of course, which has more downforce. And yeah, I don't think there's been a worse NASCAR race. And again, like I said earlier, you can make the excuse that it was an exhibition race all you want, but to me, that makes it worse that it was not entertaining at all. And remember, this style of racing is exactly what NASCAR thinks will create an entertainment package for 2019. So let's talk specifically about that finish, because it's not going to be something I want to die on in terms of a hill, but we need to talk about Jimmie Johnson and him turning Paul Menard.
Jimmie Johnson should be fucking shot!
So like I said earlier, the Austin Dillon issue from last year reared its ugly head again. It seems like with this package at Daytona, and it seems like, again, going through the rest of the year, this is going to happen a lot, where drivers get frustrated, they need to make a desperation move. The cars being as aerosensitive as they are, you're going to see things like happened here, where the cars get sucked together and somebody gets turned and spins in front of the field and takes out a bunch of people, costing the race teams, millions and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And consider also that they're not just going to be the biggest teams anymore that are tearing up all this equipment. You're going to have the go-or-go-homers, the Casey Mears with their blank car with a pink number on them. You're going to have those guys getting involved in these sorts of accidents that are caused by this situation. Do I think Jimmie Johnson's was as malicious as Austin Dillon's was last year? Absolutely not. I don't believe Jimmie Johnson intentionally did that. But if you listen to Paul Menard, Johnson has been one of the most aggressive side drafters in NASCAR, and it didn't really surprise Menard that he got turned. Now, some people have said Menard comes down on him. I think Johnson was way more at fault than Menard was. I think any movement you saw from Menard's car was almost certainly air getting packed in the rear of the car. I think most of it was a miscalculation on Johnson to side draft, and then once he got too close, it was a Stenhouse situation. But this is where we kind of get to the inconsistency of the rules. And again, I'm not going to die on this hill, but God bless America, Johnson passed Menard under the yellow line. Where's the penalty? We have seen far less egregious offenses be penalized. And in fact, this was another thing I was talking about in one of my other videos, was that the yellow line rule has been the only sacred rule in NASCAR. And of course, they don't enforce it here. Now, certainly there's some conspiracy theories out there. Jimmie Johnson just signed the new sponsor with Ally, and certainly NASCAR probably isn't going to want to take a new sponsor away, their first win in their first race, on a situation like this, because of course new sponsors are hard to come by. There was also the people very upset, and actually rightfully so, that Jimmie Johnson, who happens to own the 48 car, that is not a meme, that is not a joke, that is fact. Jimmie Johnson Jeff Gordon owns the 48 car and is commentating in the Fox Sports booth, was very nice to Jimmie Johnson in that situation. He did not look at that objectively, and Jeff Gordon's role at Fox Sports is to be a journalist. And of course, Darrell Waltrip being Darrell Waltrip, he went along with Jeff Gordon, so you didn't have any kind of back and forth discussion of the wreck. It just sounded like Hendrick Motorsports propaganda. So you get to this point where Johnson has, and I get it. People will say, well, he was avoiding a wreck. He caused the wreck, initiating a pass, and is not the rule. You cannot improve your position by going under the yellow line. He initiated the pass. He got into Menard. Whether or not Menard is sideways, I mean, you could say, and this is the other thing, is that if the rule or the exception to the rule is you're avoiding a wreck, couldn't you use that excuse for any particular reason you go under the yellow line? Look at Regan Smith. He was avoiding a wreck. Now, granted, Tony Stewart was not sideways, but does that change the context? There's no appendix in the NASCAR rule that says, if the car is sideways, then you can avoid the wreck. But if the car is going straight, you cannot drive under the yellow line. Maybe they need to add that to the rules to make it abundantly clear that you're not allowed under certain circumstances, you're allowed to advance your position under the yellow line. I don't know. It's ridiculous. It's inconsistent, and again, it's a product of this race. And I mean, poor Kyle Busch, you could tell he wanted to say some things, and he probably wisely kept his mouth shut, especially considering the comments he made about the 2019 package already. But, I mean, it's clear what happened. I mean, Kyle Busch doesn't even need to say it because people like me will say it. I mean, that was terrible. And again, I go back to last year, and everybody lit me up for saying plate racing has to change. Do you believe me now? Do you believe me now? Because this is the same package that I witnessed last year. I said it was BS racing. I said it was terrible. It was awful. You didn't listen then. Are you listening now? Because, oh boy. So that's a good segue. Let's talk about specifically why you see the train of cars.
No, that was Jimmie Johnson did it.
So why modern plate racing sucks? We'll talk about this really briefly. The main reason is because of the fact that the cars are so aerosensitive. They rely so heavily on downforce and their aerodynamics. They're very efficient cars, no doubt about it. You don't go 195 around Daytona by yourself with a restricted engine if the car isn't super slippery in the air. The problem with this is that you have an awful lot of side force created and dirty air. So when you get pull out, you not only have a massive amount of air going over the car, and of course downforce is created on a car with the cost of additional drag. Generally, you don't get a lot of downforce without adding some sort of drag to the car. So when a car is drafting along behind another one and pulls out, suddenly you've got hundreds of pounds of drag that are suddenly added to the car. In addition to that, because these cars are so aerosensitive, when you get alongside somebody, you have that side force where cars will get very unstable, and as we saw with Jimmie Johnson and Paul Menard, they will come together. That's why you have that side draft, and that's why the side draft doesn't speed up or slow down, or doesn't speed up anybody, but it slows down the other cars. So that makes passing very difficult. And it also means that the leader, who is in clean air, despite having a lot of drag on his car because he's out in front, is able to really control the pace, because any car that pulls out on him generally won't have the third place guy go with him. So he's going to have to contest with all that dirty air coming off the back of the leader's car, in addition to having to deal with the general, drag of pulling out and having to deal with wind resistance that he didn't have to deal with previously. So what you see is drivers essentially saying, screw it, I'm going to sit in line, 6th, 10th, 15th place is better than trying to pull out and gain a position and falling all the way back to 30th. So you see that line, not necessarily because the drivers don't want to race, but because, there's not a lot of opportunities to pass given the current package. That being said, in a 500-mile race, exactly what incentive is there to go racing super hard on lap 75 of 200? Is there any reason to wreck your car then, trying to race for 15th position? Absolutely not, especially when these cars are so aerosensitive. It's not like it was in 2001 where you've got essentially a brick on wheels, and that car is able to move around in the banking and be fast one way or the other. Another problem with downforce is that with higher downforce, it equals higher tire wear because the car's being shoved into the ground, the tires making more friction on the ground. This is something I learned back in the IRL days when they used to pack race. That's also why they run way up top. Even though it's the longer distance around, because of the increased tire wear, because of the increased downforce, running a wider radius of the track is not only a little bit faster from time to time, but it also saves those tires. So when a driver is running on the bottom, even if he's running a shorter distance around the track, he's taxing his car even more. And, of course, the problem with the bottom lane, as we saw in this particular race, was that not a lot of people are willing to go down there because it's almost a guaranteed ticket to the back of the train. So you have all these things coming together, and I guess the thing that's going to save NASCAR and the Daytona 500, or I guess one of the reasons they came up with the stages in the first place, is to have some reason to have a caution when you have these kind of trains. But again, I get back to it, and this is the thing that I said about being positive about 2021, is that if NASCAR screws up the Gen 7, every good move they could possibly make between here and there is going to be nullified because the racing is going to suck. So, I mean, this race should be a wake-up call for NASCAR. I don't have any trust in them. It's not going to be. The Daytona 500 is almost certainly going to be a replay of this. It's almost certainly going to have a crash on the last lap. I'm going to double down on that because I said it in the Austin Dillon video. The leader will get wrecked on the last lap of the Daytona 500 because that's, that always happens. And it's clearly the norm for this particular track at this particular time of year in this particular era of racing. So there you have it. Not a good start. Not a good start. That was the definition of crapping your pants on a big stage. Thankfully, I guess, for NASCAR, it was on FS1 rather than Fox, the Big Fox. They decided to show the boring single-car qualifying on the Big Fox. So I guess Joe Public didn't necessarily see this, but yeah, it wasn't a good look. And like I said in the beginning, in a lot of ways, it was everything NASCAR fans feared the 2019 season would be. I'm sorry I couldn't be more positive, but that was pretty awful. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section below. Be sure to subscribe for more NASCAR and motorsports content. This has been David Land on YouTube. We'll see you in the next video.